So, in part two of the Unit 2 lecture, let's take a look at what copyright actually protects in an example of a real case. So, let's look at this. Um, so Steinberg created this illustration for the New Yorker, and it shows how the people who live in New York view the world. Of course, Manhattan is the most important. It's the largest thing. It's rendered in extreme detail. Everything else is teeny in comparison because it's not important to Manhattanites. Okay. Um, the other things on the horizon are there, but they're only they're only generally drawn. They're not specific. Okay. So this illustration basically shows the worldview of New Yorkers to the rest of the world. Okay, all right, so let's look at this. And this is the poster for the movie Moscow on the Hudson, which is not related to me by any way. Okay, let's take a look at them together. Okay, so let's look at them together. Okay, they both have the red line for the horizon. They both have the blue to show water. They both use the same fonts for the title. Both show a section of New York in great detail, and the rest of the world is tiny. They both use the same type of line and paint wash. Okay. The creator of the movie poster admitted that he used the New Yorker cover as inspiration. So the courts then turned to the question of substantial similarity. And the substantial similarity question is whether an average observer would recognize the copy as having been appropriated from the original work. And in this case, the courts ruled that this was copyright infringement because it looks as though the Moscow on the Hudson poster was actually appropriated from the New Yorker cover. And right now I'm looking at it and I'm even noticing that the word Hudson and river is pretty much in the same exact font. So you'll be able to see now how the actual line between what's an idea and what's an expression is very, very blurry, and it keeps copyright attorneys very busy. Okay, so let's continue on. Derivative works and the copyright accorded to them is very important. Circular 14 is a good one to actually have printed. It gives an overview of what a derivative work is, who can create one, and the copyright that the new work qualifies for. A derivative work is created from a work that's already created. The new work has to add a substantial amount of new material. For example, if I wrote a screenplay based on a novel I'd written, the screenplay would be able to be copyrighted on its own. Someone else, however, could not write the screenplay based on my novel unless I gave them permission. Remember, copyright owners can grant permissions, and I could grant somebody permission to create the screenplay. Okay. The parts of the work that are new are eligible for copyright on its own, but the rest of the parts aren't. Okay. However, using parts of somebody else's work and transforming it into something else may be considered fair use. Fair use is extremely complicated. We'll go over that in Unit 3. But just know to wholesale use somebody's work to create a derivative work. If you do not have the copyright permission, it is infringement. Then there's compilations. Okay. Compilations are when you take things that are already published and put them together into a work. Okay, they might be copyrightable if the materials are selected, coordinated, and arranged in such a way that the resulting work as a whole constitutes a new work. If the compilation is purely mechanical, like we talked about the White Pages phone directory, copyright protection is not available. Okay. Because the selection and arrangement are considered creative, it would qualify for copyright protection. However, doing this without getting the permission of the individual copyright holders, as like for songs, would be bordering on infringement. There's a very, very narrow band of works that are compilations. Just know that if you do not own copyright for the individual components, you would be wise not to compile them without the owner's permission. Unless it's an item that's in the public domain. So, for example, if I gather the best of the best, I take all of the good top restaurant critics and their selection for the best restaurants in Los Angeles, and I compile them together. Okay. Um, I would need to have their permission, the permission of the critic who wrote the original article, if I am appropriating something into my work, unless it is something that would be considered fair use, which we will talk about shortly. Okay, but at this point, just know that it's to err on the side of caution and get permission. Um, okay, so what happens if a derivative work is created for something that's already in the public domain? Okay, um, for example, Romeo and Juliet. The story is in the public domain. That means that anybody can publish um, that story. Okay, now they're going to still attribute the authorship of it to Shakespeare, okay, but they can print the copy, sell the copies, make money on the copies, okay, right? Um, if you create derivative works from works in the public domain, okay, for example, maybe I do a compilation of Shakespeare's plays. I take 3 of his plays, I put them in a book. Clearly, everything in Shakespeare is already in the public domain. I put them in a book and I sell it. Okay, that's okay because the original works are in the public domain, so I am allowed to do that. However, okay, this does not extend the copyright protection for those works. For example, if I take Romeo and Juliet and print it in a new edition and give my own little foreword or explain what the terms are, etc., the things that I created, the things that I added to the story are subject to get their own copyright protection, beginning the day I create it, okay? However, the only thing copyrighted in that book would be the things that I created. You cannot take something from the public domain, add something, subtract something, and get a new copyright and continue to run the clock on it, okay? Also, if you are using something that is in the public domain, okay, it doesn't prevent anybody else in the world from using the same portion. That's why there's 40 different editions of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, Public Domain Sherpa, that website is really helpful for understanding derivative works. And what parts of them get their own copyright. Understand that that only applies to derivative works of things in the public domain. Okay, so let's continue on. Okay, first sale. You purchase a book and you want to sell it to somebody else. Because of the first sale doctrine, you're able to resell copyrighted things that you purchased. You can't, however, duplicate the item and sell it or give it away also. Okay, so once you buy something from the copyright owner, okay, it is yours to do whatever you want with. So if I buy my copy of Eat, Pray, Love, okay, from the bookstore, I can use it as a doorstop. I can use it as firewood. I can give it to my friend to read. I can sell it on eBay. Okay, I can do all of those things because of the doctrine of first sale. However, some things don't work that way. For example, what if the book is not a paper printed book, it's an ebook? This is where the complications begin. Some things are not sold, but they're licensed. Okay, we talked a little bit about that before. We're going to talk more on Unit 5. So if you purchase something and you are not purchasing the object, you are purchasing a license to use the item, you cannot re-gift, resell it the doctrine of first sale does not apply because you were not sold the item, you were sold the right to use the item under specific conditions for a specific length of time, etc. Okay, so make sure you read the reading on the first sale doctrine. Okay, but we will be talking about licensing a little bit later, as I mentioned. So one of the things that is definitely not sold, but is licensed as software, and you'll notice the license agreement, those come up and you scroll through them, and there's like 40 pages of fine print, and you can't use the software unless you click accept. That's called a click-through transaction. By clicking I accept, okay, you are agreeing to the terms in that 48-page document. Okay, and if you read the fine print, you will see what you are allowed to do with that copy and what you are not allowed to do with the copy. Okay, if you do not agree to those terms, you don't get to use the software. Okay, so it's like renting a house. Okay, you have the use of the house for a specific period of time. Okay, but then it reverts back to the owner of the copyright. Okay. At this point, you should be understanding that there are so many complexities of copyright law and there's many gray areas. Please continue to understand that this is how the law is. And the courts play an important role in determining whether or not things are infringement or things are not infringement. So we will look at that in more detail in the coming weeks, but please make sure to read the readings for this week because they provide a lot more clarity and detail than I did. And of course, if you have any questions, post the question in hallway discussions and I will attempt to answer it even though I'm not a copyright attorney. Okay? All right. Thank you.